Welcome on in, folks, to Inside Black and Gold. Steve Geller, Jeff Nowak. We are in the lull of the Black and Gold training sessions right now. Voluntary workouts, mandatory minicamp a wrap, and now just the long wait until the end of July for training camp to kick off out in California. I know at least, Jeff, you got to be looking forward to getting ready for a trip out west.
Oh, yeah. So 6 weeks from now. Yeah, this is the Kool-Aid episode, and we're both wearing red for some reason. I don't know why. It was unplanned, but it happened, and we're going to go with it. But yeah, so, you know, this is the time of year where it's just like, okay, what do we talk about? Because ideally, nothing's going on. It's every year I say this. This is the time of year where you kind of don't want to hear anything about players. This is the time of year where, you know, guys might get arrested for something, or, you know, awkwardness comes out of nowhere. Like, this is the time of year where you would prefer as a fan to not hear about the players on the team, because it's almost always a bad thing. Like, guys do their own thing. Guys do charitable stuff, right? Like, guys hold camps during this time of year. But by and large, if someone's name crops up in a headline somewhere, it's not a good thing. This episode is kind of like a part 2 of Friday's episode, because there's a lot that I wanted to talk about that we didn't get into because Alvin Kamara's holdout, whatever you want to call it. I don't know if we have a particularly good word for it. Alvin Kamara leaving.
Walkout.
Right. Walkout is a good word for it. Yeah. So that he can, negotiate a new contract, whatever. That kind of took over last week's episode, but there's a good bit I wanted to talk about. I want to talk about Derek Carr. I want to talk about special teams in particular. So we're going to dive in on the offense and Derek Carr in this first segment. Second segment, we're going to hear an interview with Deuce McAllister. You already heard part of it in Friday's episode. I clipped that out. It was what he had to say about Alvin Kamara. Today, we're going to hear the rest of that interview. He talked about Taysom Hill. He talked about, Willie Gay's role. We talked about the new kickoff, all that sort of good stuff. Then in the final segment, we're going to talk about special teams. Darren Rezzi had some really interesting things to say on the new kickoff. We're going to talk a lot about Lou Hedley. I did some research into something that Darren said that I found interesting in terms of net punting yardage. So we're going to talk about that. And then just generally, like, are there position battles this year on the kicking game? And I say no, and we're going to go into why. But all right, first segment, one bit of news, and that's the Saints signed tight end Jesper Horsted. Neither name is one that I've ever heard before.
No, right.
But just a depth guy who knows Derek Carr. He's really along the Jawan Johnson build of a tight end. He's like 6'3", 235, that range. So not a blocking guy, could be a move guy. He's caught touchdowns in the NFL before. I believe he has 3, but they're all in one game.
Right.
He was all Ivy League back at Princeton. He was a college wide receiver, got converted to tight end. And to make room for him on the roster, the Saints cut Kyle Sheets, a guy who probably needs to be converted to a tight end. I was talking to Mike Detillier, and it's like, if you put Kyle Sheets and Michael Jacobson next to each other and asked me, okay, which one's the tight end? I'd be like, I don't know, it's anybody's guess, right? Because you're talking about 6'4", 220 versus like 6'7", 223, something like that. Like, Michael Jacobson is a beanpole, and that's where it's going to be. It's going to be interesting to see. We talked a good bit about the tight end class. We don't have to get into it too much, but if Jawan's not there, if Jawan is not able to get back, and I think there's hope is that he is still able to be that primary tight end throughout the season, I don't know where you go for production there. Like, you're clean at number 1 on the depth chart. Like, I think that if you just go by the top line of the depth chart, this is probably a playoff team in terms of quality, right? But once you get to 2 and 3, that's dicey. That's dicey. And, that's what this NFL is. I mean, it's a battle of depth so much of the time. And so, I've had people ask me, like, oh, do you think this is a playoff team? And I think they can be, but in order for that to happen, you're going to need to be on the right side of the injury bubble in a way that you can't predict, right? And that's because this team, this roster, is not built with the level of depth that you may have seen in years past, right? Particularly like this 2017, 2018, 2019 teams. So we'll see. But I did think that was interesting, and they brought in Jesper. So he's the guy we'll get our first look at training camp. And I wouldn't be surprised if we see a few more signings in the interim, in the offing here, before we get out to Irvine.
You mentioned Jacobson, and I think the Celtics called him for their help with their run to the NBA title because he looks like a baller on the hardwood.
Former basketball player. Go Celtics. Hey.
I think I'd give you a shout out.
I did appreciate that the Mavs, the Dallas fans had a good time on Friday. They got really excited about it. They were like, we finally figured it out. And then it was like, oh, it's almost like the Celtics didn't care to sweep you because they would rather win at home anyway. It's almost
that's what I thought. It was like, we are going to, they can have this and we're just going to house them in Boston on Monday night.
It's almost like that was a classic gentleman's sweep game. And they like the only difference between that, and then this is just a tangent, but we won't get on for too long. The only difference between what the Celtics did and what most teams do is they just didn't try at all. they were like, yeah, beat us by 48. We don't care. Go for it.
Knock your socks off, right?
Because every other game, it was like, 20-point lead, 20-point lead, 20-point lead. Anyway, we don't have to get into that.
To give the Mavs fans a little bit of hope and happiness there.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, outside the Pelicans, this was a really solid basketball year for me in terms of UConn and the Celtics winning.
You've been rolling, right?
Your childhood teams. But hey, I still, the Giants are never going to win the Super Bowl as long as I live. So, don't get too mad about that. Anyway, so let's get into Derek Carr. I do feel like I hear a lot about like, hey, why are you talking so much about Spencer Rattler and Jake Hader? And I get it. And I will admit, we probably haven't talked as much about Derek Carr as maybe we should this time of year. But it's partially because like it's not that interesting to talk about. Like you kind of know what it's going to be. And until we get to it, there's really not a lot to say other than, okay, let's see how quickly he can pick this up. Is he progressing in this new system? Does Clint Kubiak's scheme seem like it's going to work for him? And so far, all of these answers are yes. Now, I put an asterisk next to that because we said the same thing last year. And what I don't want to do is spend all offseason hyping up Derek Carr in ways that we may have done last year. And then we get to the season and it's like, wow, this is a guy in a new offense. Why does he not look like, I've been hearing all training camp about how he's running the shit out of this system. And now, we're getting off to a slow start. What the hell? It's because that's kind of what happens with new systems, right? Like you have to kind of build in some time for that, acclimation. And the question is going to be, okay, how much time do you need? How much of that is winnable territory and how much of that is costing you chances to win? And that's going to be the biggest question early on. That said, we talked about his success so far in those situations, that's 2-minute drives, finishing them up with touchdowns. I do appreciate that. And, one thing that Derek talked about on Thursday, the last day of minicamp practice, is he brought this up specifically, and he brought up how there have been a handful of times throughout the course of these practices where, he'll complete a ball to Chris Olave and he'll be like, okay. And then Clint is like, no, I need it faster. Do it again. And, it's the type of thing that you kind of take for granted, but I think what you're really hearing there is that that's something that wasn't happening last year. Like the attention to detail wasn't there previously. And it was like, yeah, it's good enough. Move on. Right. And that's not good for your team. That's not good for accountability. Right. And I'm going to play his clip here in a second. But, when he's talking about how he appreciates in meetings that Clint is up there calling him out in front of his teammates because it's like, no, this needs to be better. This needs to be better. It's like you kind of look back and you're like, well, why were people upset about accountability last year? Because stuff like that wasn't happening, right? Because Derek would make mistakes. And this kind of goes back to my critique of Pete Carmichael of like, I think Pete Carmichael is and always has been a great game planner. I think he is a great kind of X's and O's coach. I do not think he is a great leader of men. I don't think that he is someone who would walk in that room and be like, no, you listen to me. This is how it's going to go. Right? Like, yeah, that you completed that pass, but it's not the way it was supposed to be run it again. Like, does that seem like his personality to you? Absolutely not. And when people get frustrated in that room, it kind of probably goes back to that, where there was way too much deference to the quarterback, even more so than the quarterback probably wanted. Like, you have the quarterback going up there and saying, thank you for calling me out in front of my teammates, because like that's what it's supposed to be. And so I let's hear that clip from Derek, and then I want to hear what you have to say about it.
The best offenses that I've been able to play with, it was very detail oriented. And no one gets a pass. If I do something, I complete a ball. Like it's happened like 5 times where like I've completed a ball and like Clint's like, nope, I need it quicker. And it's like that urgency, that intensity. Like, yeah, it was a great play, and we could have all just high-fived and be like, yeah, awesome. He's like, no, quick. He's pushing me all the time to just try and be perfect, And when he does that to me, it opens the door for everyone in the room to be like, oh, shoot, I better be on my stuff. If the quarterback's getting it, then I know everybody's got to get it. And I think that right there, and, us meeting together, them hearing him coach me in front of everybody, and the level of standard that he has set for me, and the perfection that he's trying to set for me. No one's perfect, but we set that standard. Then he knows, everyone else knows that as leaders, Eric and I and Taysom, Foster, Jamal, we can go to these guys and be like, hey, we need you to go, and because we're the ones getting it first. And so I think that part of it has been really cool from this staff and this offseason.
Yeah, for me, you talked about us not talking up or hyping up Carr much during these offseason workouts. And the great text line at WWL comes in, and you hear too often than not, it's like, oh, you guys are just pushing sunshine and rainbows. And that's
like sunshine and rainbows.
I know. And I feel like we don't want to start pushing like, oh my God, Carr's looked amazing in camp so far, then think people are going to get Super Bowl hopes and dreams off of it. But the fact is, though, I mean, he has been competent. He's looked clearly like the number one QB. I know we talked about that before. The fact that obviously these other 2 quarterbacks in camp, they might have a spot on this roster, obviously, but they're not overtaking Derek yet. He's clearly by far and away in the lead. You can tell with his decisiveness, the accuracy, just the way he's kind of commanding this offense at an early stage. And to me, that's obviously a huge positive, because I was worried about that narrative going into this season. It's like, oh, well, let's see, it's going to be the talk of Carr's learning a new offense, so it's going to take a while to get acclimated to this. And obviously, we're still in the very early goings of it, and we'll kind of see when things do progress further during training camp when the pads are on. And obviously, too, the offensive line has to do their job, because we're not seeing much of a pass rush up front, them having to do any blocking and protecting Carr. But I don't know. I'm definitely feeling good about him running this system under Clint Kubiak. We've talked about it before, too, how things have been simplified with the verbiage, and it's just easier to spit out for him and the other quarterbacks, not compared to the offense with Pete Carmichael and Sean Payton that was all tailored to Drew Brees.
There's multiple questions to be asked here, right? And one of them is, okay, is everyone on the same page now in ways that they were not previously? And I think that's true. Like, I think that there were issues in the past of like, okay, some people are at certain levels of this offense, and some people know it a lot better than others, and some people feel like you should be doing this a certain way and you're not. Yeah. And you're like, but I came in this year and this is what they told me to do. So what's the right? I think that is difficult just in general, as you're trying to kind of hodgepodge this offense together with everyone with different levels of understanding of the offense. This year, everyone's back to square one. And in terms of community and camaraderie, that's helpful. And, one thing that Derek said is that last year, it wasn't really until probably mid-season that he felt like he was up to speed in the offense, not necessarily being able to run the offense, but when you hear about someone saying, okay, second nature, that's the word he used. It's like, okay, you're not thinking on the field. You're just reacting. Like someone says something and you have it, right? And it's hard to rush that. It's hard. Like you can't really be there until you get there. And so, Derek was asked about kind of slow starts he's had in the past, and he has had to learn a lot of different systems, even for a 10-year veteran on that, who's been on the same team for a lot of that time. He said to learn 5, 6 different offenses. I mean, even his time with the Saints, he's learned 2 different offenses.
Exactly right.
So, you'd hope that structure of learning helps him speed things up this time around. But this is what he had to say when he was asked about that.
Man, it's a new year. Again, nobody cares at the end of the day. You got to learn new offense. Nobody cares at all. We got to go perform. And I just tried my best to take everything and the experience that I've learned, and asked myself that question: how can I be better in this first year? And I looked at everything I'm doing, and I just tried to take it all to just an extreme level of mental, capacity that I could possibly take. And hopefully I'm not showing it too much, but I'm tired. This offseason has been an absolute mental grind for me and for my teammates. And just pushing the guy. I've been pushing so hard and encouraging so hard to get past certain steps, because if Eric wants to have a good year, I got to have a good year. The running backs want to have a good year, the O-line, the tight end, it takes everybody, And so we have been pushing so hard just to make sure that we can come out and just be so focused on playing good football from the start. And, I don't have any promises. I don't have any guarantees that it's going to be better. I just know that we did more, and we're going to continue to do more until training camp gets here and the season gets here.
Yeah, so we'll see how that goes. I mean, that's going to be a question. We'll have a better idea when we get to training camp, especially those 49ers joint practices. I think that'll be helpful. What I will say is and Derek talked about he had to come in better shape this year because of all the play actions. And I think that's going to be a much more helpful setup for everyone on this team in terms of, there's this misnomer that you have to run the ball well, that you have to rip off chunk plays in the run game to get to an effective play action. That's not true. You just have to be willing to run the ball, right? Another team can stop the run because they're firing off the line of scrimmage. Just because you didn't pick up 3-4 yards of carry, the fact that they're respecting the run is all you need to run a play action. I think that's what you would get away from last year, is the run game wouldn't be effective, and you just didn't do it. Later in the year, you saw it. The numbers are clear, and that's why they kind of went back to it that well more and more often. And you're going to see that. And there's a lot of different types of play action. This is a lot of running for the quarterback in this offense. And we've seen that throughout the minicamp even. You're constantly seeing the running, the quarterback sprinting out away from the line of scrimmage. Whether he has the ball or not, you have to sell that play action fake. And it's just a lot more running than you typically would see a Saints quarterback do. And so that's going to be a change. One other thing I want to get into here, and it's not really about Derek Carr, but it's about what he was saying about the offensive line. And here's a clip of Derek talking about that.
I think the coolest thing about our offensive line, I think they've had a wonderful camp and OTAs and offseason. I really do. But I think the coolest thing I've seen, that unit just come together like they are a walking herd down the hallway wherever they go. And I think that's really cool. I think that unity, that bond, that cohesiveness, that togetherness, I thought they were close last year, but this is just another level that they've taken it to with Eric's leadership and seizing those guys. I mean, everyone's bought in. You just feel this, and not anyone wasn't. It's just you know what I'm saying. It's just different. You can just feel a different stampede coming down the hall when we were about to start our offensive meeting, and you hear Eric yell. 30 seconds later, every offensive lineman's going to walk in the door, and that's a cool thing to see. And so, as a quarterback, I mean, those are your best friends. And so, whenever you see that group growing together, and then as they're growing tighter together, and then they start doing some things on the field, and you're like, oh, wow, that's just a positive sign. And so I think they took to heart a lot of stuff, from last year and things like that. And, they got a lot of toughness and mental makeup about them. And I've just been really impressed with just watching on the field stuff's been awesome, but off the field, just that has been the coolest part to me.
Well, the big thing to me there, and something that I have noticed over this season as opposed to the last season, the year before, and what Derek's talking about, Eric McCoy is the leader of that offensive line group now. And you would probably say he was the leader of that offensive line group last year, but it's tough to be the leader of a group when you are not the veteran player of that group, right? And, one of the things that this team lost in the last few seasons that I don't think was replaced well enough was Teron Armstead in that leadership that he had, that he inherently was able to bring to that room in a way that not everyone can. He was a leader of that room. He was the guy who talked to the media. Well, when he left, you're naturally going to be like, okay, who's taking over that leadership role? Is it going to be Ryan Ramczyk, a guy who barely ever talks? That can't be it. Is it going to be Andres Pete, a guy who barely ever talks? And I'm not even sure if he likes to play football. That can't be it. There's a reason that we constantly talk to James Hurst, because even though he wasn't like a key player of that offensive line, he became a more entrenched player. But he was a backup swing tackle, but he was talking to the media every week, and that's because he ended up being like that team leader. Because it's really tough for a third, fourth year pro to be like, I'm in charge now, give me the reins. But I think that's what happened. And that's what's happened so far this year. And I think that's a very productive thing, because Eric McCoy has a very, what's the word? Like leadership savvy in his personality. Like he just kind of oozes, like you want to follow that guy. Like he is a very easy person to get behind, right? And it's easy to say that until you don't have it. And then you're like, well, who's bringing that to that room? And I think that is a very good thing for that group this year, because I'm not sure that kind of, lighthouse, if you will, like the person that you were supposed to kind of use as your weather vane of like, this is how we're supposed to be acting. This is how an NFL player, a professional, works. I think that's there right now. And I think everyone's kind of more tight knit around Eric, and even Caesar. Like Caesar's kind of in that secondary role too. But I think like what Derek's saying there is on point, and I think you can notice that in terms of how the offensive line operates. And when you have 5 offensive linemen playing as a unit, and they can be a lot better than the individual pieces. And I think that's good for young players, particularly that group this year, which has a lot of young players on it. And so we'll see how that develops. But I just thought that was a really good observation, and you can really see it in terms of Eric being the new leader of that group.
Yeah, and I think what you're talking about too with him, being that mouthpiece, I guess, for the group, he's really good at just conveying the information to you. He's not going to give you a lot of NFL talk, player talk, he's going to give you quite honest answers. And it might not be the most lengthy soundbite, but he's going to give you a solid, cohesive answer that's not just brushing you off, giving you your typical NFL speak that you get from guys.
Yeah, Eric's real. He's just a real person. Like he puts the work in, and he's honest with you about it. Like he got in a fight with Derek on the field last year, and it was like, a positive moment for the team in the long run. Like they were better after that. And like, I just think that's I don't know. It's just a good example of like, there's positive and negative emotions, and you can kind of create it in all sorts of different ways. And it's like, that's the type of thing that could have spiraled and become a major issue. Instead, because of the guy Eric is, and because this is a partnership with a quarterback and a center, you're able to spin that positively. And, I think that is a lot to say about who Eric is as a leader, and hopefully that continues. But that's it. There's a lot more to that interview. If you want to go check it out, feel free. Derek talks forever. He had a lot of interesting things to say. It just sounds like there's a lot of buy-in right now. And we'll see. That was the case last year too. So that's where I say, like, you kind of take it with a grain of salt. But one of the things he said was like, this team kind of came in pissed off this year. Like that's a quote. Like they're angry about how last year went, because it's like, well, I guess we got to put in more work now. And that's kind of what you've seen so far. And so hopefully the offense shows the signs of that early on, but we'll see. I'm sure everyone's gearing up to hate on Derek Carr more. So if he does struggle, the grace won't last very long.
Yeah, this team is not like lacking tons of talent. There's a lot of talented players on this roster. It's just the fact we're going to see how can it come together up front, the offensive line, definitely on offense. The run game needs to get better than it was a year ago. And overall for Carr, had a pretty decent season considering the fact too, the man was dealing with a shoulder injury for most of it, gutted through it. And then we saw really, hopefully the guy he is at the end of the year, he can be that player to start week 1 against Carolina.
He's got to be that player. Like that's the deal.
Got to be, right.
He's got to be the 16th highest paid quarterback in the NFL. That's what he is now. I don't need Derek to be, first team all pro. All right. I do need him to be above replacement. at quarterback, right?
Yeah.
Like I need a 4,000 yard, 25 interception, 25 touchdown, 10 or fewer interceptions guy, someone who's going to execute in the red zone, someone who's going to lead game-winning drives. That's what you need. You don't need 5,000 yards. You don't need 40 touchdowns. You don't need these crazy otherworldly stats. You need consistency. And so we'll see if that's what we get from Derek in year 2. I'm hopeful. I'm optimistic, but that's just me. I'm an optimistic person, typically speaking.
My hopes and dreams rely on up front, so we'll get more of a picture of it come training camp time. I'm definitely still leery about this O-line.
That's fair, as you should be. We'll find out. But all right, let's wrap up a segment of Inside Black and Gold. Have you subscribed yet? Have you? Why not? And if so, thank you. Do it. That's all. Ring the bell on YouTube. Make sure to go check us out wherever you get your podcasts. Even if you watch on YouTube, go over to your podcast player. Hit subscribe. Why not? What do I ask you for? We're
a good time.
Yeah. Hit us up on Twitter at Jeff_Nowak, at Steve Geller WWL. You can hit the show up at Saints_pod. And without further ado, let's get to some ads. And we're back on Inside Black and Gold. Jeff Nowak, Steve Geller, and you, the person who just hit subscribe. Thank you. I appreciate that. And as I hit my camera, and I was doing so well. I hadn't moved at all, and then I kicked it. Anyway, this segment, we're going to hear from Deuce McAllister. We played you the Alvin Kamara portion of this interview in Friday's episode, so I'm not going to play that for you again. There is a decent bit more of this interview than what I've cut it down to. It's about 10 minutes long. So if you want to go check that out, it's over on WWL.com. We're going to talk about Taysom Hill. We're going to talk about kickoff rules. We're going to talk about Willie Gay, all that good stuff. This is from Deuce McAllister again on WWL. And let's hear it.
Deuce, and you've been part of this. You're passing the torch when you're playing running back. And you know what? The Saints got to be a little disappointed. Now, it'd be interesting to see what he's going to say now. He was highly confident when he came on board, that being Kendre Miller. But it's not like it's Bijan Robinson waiting in the wings with Alvin. Yeah.
Well, no, but at the end of the day, Kendre has to get healthy. That's where injuries hindered him when he was coming into the league. Injuries hindered him last year during the regular season. And so he's got to figure out, what do I have to do for my body to make sure that I am 100% or close to 100% on game day? Because you're not going to feel great throughout the week. So he's got to figure out how to take care of my body and to make sure that I am ready to play on Sundays. So, at this point, he's penciled in, but you probably have to lean on Jamal just because he's going to be available.
Right, yeah, even though you'd want the high draft pick, Kendre Miller to be the guy. Mike, we talked about this from Fresno State. He's been
Jordan Mims.
Jordan Mims. Now, that's like a dark horse. That's like a poor man, a running back. But that's almost the mindset, like Kendre Miller, that you're going to be available. I'll look at Jordan Mims and then Deuce, to go off on a different realm or tangent. Now, with Taysom Hill, now they just restructured him. And then I'm looking at they count on Taysom Hill and me the way it looks at the contract like this year and the next season after that. And I'm like, we're not saving Taysom. We're going to run him into the ground. We're going to utilize him. And like I noticed today, they're doing that return kickoff coverage. He's in the middle of the pack on kickoff coverage. So I think we're not saving Taysom for nothing now going forward.
Well, I think they're going to utilize him, but you also have to save him as well, Bobby. Because he's not a young player anymore as well. You can line him up at the tailback position. They've done it in the past. He may not have gotten the ball when he was at the tailback position, but at the same time, do you want to give Taysom 100 touches and he only played 10 games, or do you want to give him 65 touches and he plays, all 17 games? Yeah, all 17 games for you. And so, that's really where you have to be smart. I don't mind using Taysom as a guy that cuts off the backside as far as the defensive end is concerned. I have a problem when Taysom is lead blocker and he's working on a Sam linebacker as he's trying to lead up on a Mike linebacker. And the other part of that is Taysom has to be able to protect Taysom as well. Because it's one thing to take 20 tackles, but when I'm taking 20 tackles and I am the guy that's delivering all of that brunt of that hit, it wears on your body. And so he's just got to understand when it's time to get my 5 and when it's time to get down after I've gotten 3.
Deuce, one of the things on the defensive side of football, and we talked about this before, it almost looked as though you were a step slow on the defensive side of football. But one addition out there, Willie Gay. And until you can really see how fast this dude is on the field. Now, today they ran a lot of base. So you saw all 3 linebackers. You saw DeMario, you saw Pete Werner, and you saw Willie in the lineup. But, man, his speed to go from point A to point B is really fast. And so you got to find a way to utilize him. Is it as the spy as what Kansas City did, and also as a pass rusher?
I'm using him in sub. I'm going to use him in nickel, but I'm using him in sub. And so for me, I need to get them in third and medium, third and long situations where I go 3 down, 3 defensive linemen down, and then I'm bringing 3 backers on the field. I want athletes, so I got guys that can be able to protect me against the run, but also whether it's Pete Werner, whether it's DeMario, whether it's Willie rushing the passer, one of those guys can be that other rusher. Now, where they have to be careful is when teams say, okay, it's 3rd and 7. We know you want to get exotic. We're going to run the ball. And you got to be able to stop the run in those situations. But for me, I am going to use his speed. And the other thing is he right now it may not be a lot, but it's going to be a lot. They're going to expect a lot out of you because you're going to be moving and playing in a lot of different spaces and places. So I think he's up to that. And then for him as well, he wants to get paid. He wants to get something long-term. Didn't we just talk about guaranteed?
Yes.
He wants a long-term opportunity. And so that was the one thing that we talked about for this defense. How can you get faster, whether it's in the defensive line, whether it's in the second level, or whether it's on the back end? And I think that they've added speed to that unit. But, guys, here's the thing for me. Your skill is fine. Your back 7 is fine. This team will be successful. Can they run the football, and can they stop the run?
Amen.
That's going to tell you what this team will do. So right now, without any pads, it looks really good. But the tell of the tape will be when they put the pads on. Now, here's the other thing that has to happen, because right now you're playing a right tackle at left tackle. You're playing your left tackle at right tackle. So you've got moving pieces and parts. But here's what's got to happen. They have to be able to develop some young players. And when I say they, that's coaching staff, that's front office being able to bring some guys in that they can continue to develop, whether that's draft picks, whether that's via trades, whether that's via signings, whatever it may be. But at some point, some young players are going to have to step up for this team. And that's just not in the interior. That's on the outside, because I don't know if you're solidified, honestly, at the 3 and the 4 wide receiver position. And then that's probably at the tight end position with the injury news that you have with Juwan Johnson as well. That opens up the door for somebody. Now, is that a young player? We'll see. They may have to sign a veteran tight end to kind of step in. And I think there's also a little question mark. I don't know how big it is in the secondary at the other safety position. Are you truly satisfied there? Or will you move some guys around or even sign a guy to be able to step in and help you in the secondary? So from a development standpoint of a young player to get them ready to play, and now there's one player that he's got to be ready to start, and that was your tackle. Now, he's got to be ready to start. But the other guys, they've got to be ready to play. I don't know if you're going to lean on some of those other guys like you're going to do with your new left tackle as far as going in and playing immediately. But some of those other young guys, they've got to get ready to play because at some point they're going to lean on them.
Deuce, one of the things, I don't know if we've talked about it with you, about the new kickoff rule and your thoughts on how that'll work out. And no one really knows. It's kind of the genie in the bottle now. Once it's out, it's out. But your thoughts on how that will affect the game, because I do see this rule. If you give that return man, or men, I should say, because there'll be 2 back there, an opportunity, and you that close and you miss a tackle, that guy's going in the end zone. He's taking it all the way back. So your thoughts on the new kickoff rule and how that affect? I think it does bring some excitement back to the kickoff.
Here's what I want you to figure. Think of it as wide zone, left and right,
yep,
or a cutback to the middle. it's going to be a wide zone, left and right, or a cutback to the middle. And so for guys that can really play in space, it's going to be perfect for them. For guys that, straight line speed, one cut guy, it's perfect for them. And so I think that for an offensive standpoint, if you're not at the 35 or 40, you're cheating yourself. You're doing something wrong with your setup and your system. And so it should be able to push points up. It's going to put a lot more stress on defenses because of where offenses should be starting. And so I'm intrigued how some teams are going to try to build their rosters as well. Because like we talked about earlier, I think it was me and Mike, but normally, a team may carry 8 offensive linemen.
Yep.
Is that still going to be the case? What position group is going to get squeezed? Maybe it's a defensive lineman. I'm going to have more of a hybrid type defensive end that can run down the field. And I only may carry 3 defensive tackles instead of 4 defensive tackles. And people are like, well, why are you going to do that? Well, I need an extra body on kickoff. I need an extra body on kickoff return. And this guy can kind of do both. On sub downs, he can slide inside, that being a defensive end, and play tackle for me. But if they're kickoff or kickoff return plays, the numbers tell me that I need him more so than I need a 4th defensive end a defensive tackle that only may participate in 12 plays, 13 plays.
Charles, I got to ask Deuce one more because I've been tooting this horn or just I'm still shocked. Deuce, I don't know if I've ever witnessed this. That I don't know how we didn't get the double-digit wins. Well, I know how we didn't. You got to go out and do it. But wait,
you should know.
To me, if we do this year, if we have a top 10 scoring offense and top 10 scoring defense, and we double-digit in the turnover margin, I don't know if I ever saw that. In 2022, we were minus 11, one before last. Then we were like plus 11, which was 3rd best. And then we had number 8 scoring offense. Scoring defense, number 9 scoring offense. Deuce, we underachieved. I'm like, if we do that again, I think that just those numbers right there, scoring offense, scoring defense, and you plus 10, plus 11, you should win. Hello.
Red zone offense,
Bingo.
red zone offense, red zone.
All right. Thanks a lot, Deuce McAllister. Always good stuff. I always appreciate his takes on the running backs. I can't imagine why. He just seems to know what he's talking about when it comes to running backs. And I think where he's spot on with Kendre Miller, right? Like you're talking about a guy who's going into year 2, but we just don't know whether he can stay on the field. And I don't know if he knows if he can stay on the field. This offseason was important to him. He wanted to get a full offseason in, and he did so far. We'll see how that plays out over the next month plus. I think you were limiting his reps to some extent, and that's why you saw maybe a little bit more of Jordan Mims, right, than you might have been expecting. But we'll see. Either way, with Alvin's situation, this should be a scenario where Kendre, you feel like, hey, he could be the guy. He's basically working his way into, I'm the new RB1.
Right.
But we just don't feel like that's happening. And that's frustrating because you spent, a 3rd round pick. It's not nothing, especially at the running back position. Alvin Kamara was a 3rd round pick. By year 2 with Alvin, you were like, this guy's going to be a star. So we'll see. But I think Deuce is right on there. For Kendre to make an impact on this team, he's got his own process is going to be the most important. He needs to be consistent. He needs to find a way to stay healthy. And we'll see. But it's going to be a lot to do with him and not necessarily the Saints, I think.
Yeah, you mentioned consistency. I think that's something obviously that head coach Dennis Allen brought up. And yeah, I don't know what Kendre, if he just hasn't looked like that full on running back I've seen highlights from TCU. I don't know if it's still on that mend from the injury, if he's still working through some things. He sure came in with a ton of confidence. We heard him draft night on WWL saying he's coming for that number 1 spot. And I just feel like that guy's been missing. I'm hoping he can renew that confidence. I'm not saying you have to be cocky and say you're coming for Kamara's spot, but I definitely want him to be running and playing more with that edge to him. And I just feel like it hasn't been there lately.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know how much of an edge can you show in an unpadded practice.
Right, that's fair too.
So I don't know about that. I mean, I'd like when the pads come on. Yeah, I need to see a guy who's got that kind of edge. And at the end of the day, if he's available, then that's a start, right? When he was available last year, I feel like he made plays. And until you're consistently available, we don't know what to consistently expect. So to me, that's it. Like, I'm not going to make any strong determinations about like, oh, he didn't look like he was about to knock someone's head off during a practice where he's not allowed to hit anybody anyway. So we'll see. But he didn't make a ton of plays in minicamp. Like, that's for sure. You didn't see him breaking any runs. You didn't see him catching the ball downfield. You didn't see him involved in a ton of action. So that is what it is.
Well, just like even for the 2 days we did see Kendre out there were a few times where you were just like, whoa, this is what we need. This is what this team is looking for. Obviously, someone that was on a level that was above the rest. And I don't know, like you said, he's just a third-round pick, but that's still a pretty good investment for a running back.
Yeah, but what I will say is the last time we saw him on the field, he was the most explosive running back we saw for a while. So hope maybe he's a gamer, right? It's tough. Like, some guys don't shine in practice, but then you get them on the field and they look different. So, like, if that's the case, you got to play in games, you know?
Right.
That's kind of where I am.
I will say I thought his pass catching ability last year was better than I imagined it would be coming in. Yeah,
I thought he, you know, he didn't get a lot of opportunities in the season, but you did see him that nice catch in the preseason from Jameis against the Chargers, and he had a couple long pass receptions this season. I know he had one against the Patriots, and he had one against the Bears that he actually got hurt on. So, I mean, the talent's there. It's just a matter of whether you can put it all together. So we'll see. One other thing Deuce talked about that I agree with completely is for Taysom, you know, and Bobby's big on this. Bobby's like, we're going to run Taysom into the ground.
He just wants to just abuse Taysom all season long. What are we saying?
He wants to see 1,000-yard Taysom. And I'm not saying like 1,000-yard receiver. I'm just saying like all-purpose yards. He wants 1,000-yard Taysom, and I think there is 1,000-yard Taysom. The question is, how close can you get to 1,000-yard Taysom without also getting, you know, the Tim Tebow pretzel the Sam Bradford pretzel version of Taysom, which is the broken Tim Tebow pretzel, right? Like, I think that there's a balance there, and you got to find it. That said, with what we have seen in the Clint Kubiak scheme, yes, I think Taysom's going to be on the field a lot and in a lot of different ways. The question is, how do you make sure you're not allowing him to take way too many hits? And I think the hits part of that is important. When we talked to Dennis Allen, you know, he was asked kind of, okay, is there going to be like a snap count or a touch count or anything like that? And he said, no, like they're not going to go into the week with a number of, okay, 30% of the snaps. Let's see what we can do. Right. Like, oh, you hit your mark. No, you're done now. No, it's going to be kind of a collision count more than anything else, like a high impact play count, right? Like, how many times are we going to allow him to just put his head down and bowl into a linebacker? And that's going to be more significant this year because you're going to be asking him to block a lot more than you have in the past, especially because that's the only thing. If you're going to have him line up at fullback, which seems to be the case, going to have to block. And we've seen him block in the past, but he's never been that primary like lead blocker consistently. So it's going to be interesting to see how they split that up. And that's the thing. If you have him on the field as a fullback and a lead blocker all the time, it's going to limit what you feel like you can do with him as a runner, you know, as a quarterback in those QB power sets, right? So I do think it's got to be a balance. And I think the balance is between Bobby's idea of like run him into the ground and reality, which is like you got a 34-year-old quarterback who's a lot more valuable to you over 17 games than he will be highly productive over 10 games. So it's always going to be a balance with him. But I do think, like, again, like Deuce said, it's like it's also got to be on Taysom to understand that not every play needs to end in a bone-jarring collision. Like, take a note from Alvin. Sometimes just go out of bounds. Like, if you got the first down and you're not fighting for, like, those extra 2 yards aren't going to make much of a difference. Like, I understand if it's like 3rd and short and you got to fight for it. If it's 2nd and 1 and you rather just get the first down there, that's one thing. If it's the difference between a 3rd and 4 and a 3rd and 3, or a 2nd and 5 and a 2nd and 3, you don't need to take the hits. And it's like, and I know that kind of grates the sensibilities of some of the old school, like, you know, somebody hit somebody people, but that's just the reality of the NFL. If your stars aren't there, then you are not as good of a team as you would be. And you have to play in such a way that allows you to be available. We talked about that with Kendre just now, and it's going to be the same case with Taysom. Taysom played in 16 games last year. Taysom, in one of the highest usage seasons of his career, he was able to be out there basically the entire season. So, I think he is starting to understand this a little bit more as he gets older, but that's going to be the key, I think.
Yeah, and I think Taysom, you mentioned, that old school mentality. I almost feel like that's embedded in him, and he almost thrives on the contact. So we'll see, because I don't know if I see Taysom like skipping out of bounds instead of getting another yard.
Well, there's a balance.
I
It's
know.
gotta be a balance, right? Because you do want to see Taysom do that kind of snowplow thing, right? Like that's kind of the best part of watching him. But you can't do that every play. Not if you want to survive.
Who knows? Maybe he gets, if Juwan's shelved for longer than we imagine, maybe he gets more used at the tight end position this year.
I just think it's like, okay, well, you can use him however you want. But
he's got to learn, right?
Yeah, but like if you want to use him there for their whole season, it's got to be a scenario where you take care of yourself and you protect yourself. So that's kind of where I'm at with that. But, the other thing Deuce talked about was special teams. He talked about Willie Gay. We've talked a good bit about Willie Gay, so I don't want to get into that. We're going to talk about special teams in the final segment, so we can hit on what he talked about there. Anything else you want to hit before we go to break?
No, just not hitting Taysom, definitely. But overall, like I said, you mentioned these guys a little bit. We talked about Kendre Miller, Taysom Hill. This offense has the talent around. And I know some folks are concerned maybe about wide receiver number 3 and 4 of the depth chart there. But overall, for me, I still see a potent offense that's hopefully ready to do some real damage in this Clint Kubiak system, and just excited to see more of it unfolding, because so far so good, but not trying to pump sunshine and rainbows, as one texter said.
I mean, I wish. It's kind of gross today. I think it would be nice if there was some sunshine and rainbows, but yeah. Who's going to block? That's my question. You put Rashid Shaheed and Chris Olave out there. So one of them's going to block, right? You're going to throw the ball every time they're on the field. That's the question. That's one of the things that, this is just a tangent, but it's one of the really nice things about Mike Thomas over his time here is you never had to ask that question of like, oh, we want to run to his side, but is he going to hold up on that block? He's usually bigger than the guy defending him. Now, that's not true.
No, definitely not.
So that's going to be something. But all right, let's hit the break. We're going to come back. We're going to hear from Mr. Rizzy, a guy that's excited.
Yes.
You can hear it in his voice.
Hit the hole.
He's excited. He's having a good time. So let's talk about it. This is Inside Black and Gold. I'm Jeff Nowak. He's Steve Geller. We will be right back. All right. One more time around the sun here on Inside Black and Gold. I'm Jeff Nowak. He's Steve Geller. And this is going to be the special team segment. So everyone can tune out right now unless you're a weirdo like us. And this is really kind of interesting to you.
It's been really interesting this year, obviously.
I've always found special teams interesting. I just don't think most people are on my wavelength. But, when you go into a season and, there's a new kickoff rule, and I don't think anyone really knows.
Right.
How it's going to go. You have 32 teams all kind of doing there's no set parameters of like, this is how you're going to coach it. This is how you're going to play it. This is how you're going to block. Right. And we talked to Darren a good bit about that. But first things first, I do want to talk about the kicker and the punter specifically. And I asked, Dennis Allen was asked if there's going to be a position battle at kicker or punter, and he gave a non-answer. So I'm not going to play it. But I did ask Darren, what's different about Blake this time around, Blake Grupe specifically. And I thought his answer was telling of how the coaching staff is viewing their specialists going into year 2. And let's hear that.
Listen, like any rookie going into year 2, you kind of guys been through the process already. There's nothing that he hasn't been through yet, and so this time of year is great. Listen, today we had a nice 20-mile-an-hour left-to-right wind, which we don't see a lot of. It's good for us to get practice at. I mean, we don't play many outdoor games on grass with so just to get that work today was pretty cool. Definitely more confident. I see him out here. Obviously, we have Charlie from Ireland, and I see him out here coaching him up a little bit because here's a guy that's brand new to the whole thing, and so but But I think him and Lou, never really had an off season before. And so to kind of see those guys attack this offseason, I've seen a major improvement in both guys. They got a chance to get a little rest, and then they've kind of been working on the things that they felt like they needed to work on the most. And so I see both those guys doing that out here. Obviously everyone talks about that big jump from year 1 to year 2. I think we'll see that out of both guys this year. I do.
Yeah, and so that sounds like, you have Charlie Smith, you have Matt Hayball, but it sure sounds to me like, this coaching staff feels like they have 2 young specialists, and they are expecting not only for them to start, but for them to improve year over year, to fix some of the issues that plagued them. For Blake, it's okay, you missed way too many kicks inside the 30, which was 2, which is too many. For Lou, it was okay, we feel like you kicked the ball well positionally, but maybe you need to improve that kind of your field flipping kicks. So we have that. But that doesn't sound to me like a coach who's going into training camp saying, okay, let's see who wins. It's anybody's game. No, I don't think that's the case at all.
What I thought was interesting, there were all the oohs and ahs at practices, seeing Headley booming some punts, and you were like, this is nothing new for you. You've seen him do it in pregame practices.
And that's what Darren said. When Darren was asked about that, he was like, I don't know if that's really a difference. We asked him to punt a certain way, and that's what he did. Now, here is a clip of Darren kind of, he was asked about the net punting specifically, and this is what he had to say.
Yeah, I think there was a narrative out there that he didn't have a lot of leg strength because of some of the numbers, which I think is a false narrative. He does. It's just we didn't ask him to do a whole lot of that, which we may ask him to do more of that this year coming up.
Darren, I know the
follow-up. Yeah, all good.
Talking about it, but everything you say makes sense, and obviously the lack of return yards is the number that stands out. But net average still being sort of the end-all, be-all. What led to him having one of the lower net averages in the league?
A lot of it has to do with where we're punting the ball from. You'd be surprised at how many times last year, or maybe not, how many times we punted the ball between the 40s. So when Phil and I break down this season, sometimes numbers can lie to you, right? Yeah. So if you're punting the ball a lot of times between the 40s, you don't have the gross potential and the net potential because the field is limited. Right. We didn't have a lot of punts backed up last year. Our offense did a heck of a job of getting the ball and kind of getting those couple of first downs. We had very minimal punts from a backed up position. So you shrink the field, and so your gross and net capability goes way down. And so sometimes that's how the numbers can lie. Well, that's why his return number average against was very good, and that's why his pin percentage was very good, because we had a lot of punts from the middle part of the field, and so that's why some of those numbers can sometimes not tell the whole story.
All right, so when you hear that, you're like, is that true though? Like, he's saying that one of the reasons that Lou Headley's net punting numbers were so low, and we're talking down toward the bottom of the league, is at least in part driven by the fact that the Saints punted an inordinate number of times between the 40s. And, when you kind of think about it, it's like they did do that a lot, right? Now, it's tough to find statistics on punters. They're not as tracked as easily as some of the others. But I went through today and I looked them up in terms of, okay, where was each punt from? What was the net?
Wow.
And I do think that you did have a lot of situations where, okay, if you're punting from their 39, you could hit the perfect punt, pin them at the 1. That's a 38-yard punt. And what's Lou's net punt yardage was about 39.7, right? Which is low. It's down toward the bottom of the league. And so how many times was he asked to punt on the opposing side of the field? It was 15. 15 of his 75 punts on the season were on the opponent's side of the field. That's pretty crazy when you think about it. Now, 21 of those punts total were past the 45. And I think that's a good cutoff because, when you're talking about, okay, you're punting from the 45. If you hit a perfect punt and pin them at the 5-yard line, that's a 50-yard net punt, right? If you pin them at the 10, that's a 45-yard net punt. If you put them at the 15, which is a successful punt from your own 45, you're putting them inside their own 20, that's a 40-yard net punt. So I think that's a good kind of cutoff point of, okay, if you're punting beyond this mark, you are seriously limiting the punter's chance of having a really impressive net punting number. He was asked to do that 21 times. Nearly a third of his kicks last season were from beyond the 45-yard mark. So he only had 39 kicks from the 21 to 45-yard range, which that's kind of your bread and butter of like, you want a really long punt, give your punter the ball at the 20 and let him go ham.
Right.
And downfield, because it's kind of, there's a diminishing return when you get inside the 10, because a lot of times you're kind of backed up on your own goalpost. You really just want to make sure it doesn't get blocked. You want to make sure you want to get a good kickoff, but you can't wait. And so you're not necessarily getting that, real wind up punt. Whereas like if you're at the 15 or the 25, that's where you really, you're not worried about the rush so much and you can just whale it. He didn't really get a ton of opportunities there. So kind of that stacks up. But when you do look at, okay, what did Lou do on those kicks? The kicks from the 21 to the 45. His overall net punting yardage was 39.7. On those kicks, it was 41.9, which it's not necessarily fair to take those kicks away because every punter has those kicks, right? Like maybe not as many as Lou had, but every punter's net yardage should go up if you eliminate all the kicks in opposing territory. So, that's not just for Lou. But there is you can say like, hey, well, he had a 63-yard net punt last year. He had a 56-yard net punt last year. He can get that distance. They just necessarily weren't asking him. That said, I do take some issue with what Darren said, because you look at, okay, but what about the kicks from inside, from the 11-yard line to the 20-yard line, right? He had 11 of those, an average of 41.5 yards per punt. Now, like I said, inside the 10, you can say, well, you're not really giving yourself a great opportunity, because if that ball gets blocked, it's a touchdown or a safety. Sometimes if you're close enough, you don't even get the full range that you would normally get, and you got the punter with his heels on the end of the end zone. So that's not a great situation. So we can eliminate those and just look at 11 to 20. He kicked 11 of them, 623 net yards. It's 41.5 yards per punt. So that number, which should be a good number, is actually lower than his number from between 21 and 45, right? And those are the kicks. When you're talking about field flipping kicks,
right?
Those are the kicks where you should have plenty of opportunity to just nail a kick. You're not worried about, necessarily a return. You're just trying to get it as far down as possible and let your guys cover. That's where I think you really did not get enough out of Lou. And so I think the reality is somewhere in the middle, where yes, his net yardage was probably a little artificially lowered by those kicks downfield, but they also weren't helped by the fact that you weren't getting kind of that elite distance closer to your end zone. Just for perspective, Jamie Gillen is kicker for the Giants. He punted probably the most of anybody. I think he had 95 punts last year. So we had 20 more punts than the Saints did. He punted past his own 45 19 times. So he punted 20 more times. He still punted 2 fewer times past his own 45-yard line. Inside from 21 to 45, he punted 59 times. So you compare that to Lou. He had 20 more of those opportunities. So, and his net yardage was around the same range as Lou when you're talking about 21 to 45. So I do think that if you kind of, when you regress closer to the mean in terms of the Saints need to stop punting so close to midfield all the time, then Lou's numbers are going to be a little better. But I do think that he has put some work in terms of making sure when he gets those opportunities, he takes better advantage of them. And here's the thing, and Darren said this as well. If you can add some like a little better number there from a net yardage perspective on those kicks where you do have an opportunity to flip the field, then what Lou did in terms of pinning teams back, and you combine those two things, you have an elite punter. So I don't know. Like I feel confident in what Lou's going to be able to do. I'm sorry that was a really long tangent about the punter, but when I hear a coach throw a number out there, throw like an assumption out there like that, I always have to check it. So I think it was a hit and miss.
I don't know if you have the numbers handy, but I felt like during last season, Headley was pretty good about pinning the teams, from the 20 or inside pretty well. And I'm actually surprised. I don't know if maybe anyone did, but I don't feel like we got to talk to him at all during the voluntary workouts or minicamp.
I mean, he was there.
Yeah, obviously he was there. But
if he wanted to talk to him, he could have talked to him. We didn't bring him to the podium.
No.
But they didn't bring a lot of people to the podium. Yeah, I mean, he was there. We talked to him. It was just, it wouldn't say it's an appointment interview.
I got you.
One thing I'll add in terms of, not the punter, but the kicker for Charlie Smith. So one note that I think a lot of people might not be familiar with, the practice squad rules changed for this year. And there's 16 regular practice squad slots, but there's a 17th practice squad spot that is exclusively carved out for an international player. So when you're talking about, okay, how can the Saints develop this guy over the course of a few years? That's how, because, even if they stay with Blake Grupe, which I think is the, odds on favorite to be the case, you can still keep him around and not even waste one of the practice squad spots that you might want to use on somebody else through this international program. So I think that was part of the reason you brought him in the first place, knowing that he's probably not going to make the roster, but that you can stash him and help him learn. And maybe in a couple of years, hey, because he has that cannon leg. So we'll see. But that's the last thing I have on that. Anything else before we go on to special teams?
No, with Charlie Smith, just a little bit concerning. Obviously, accuracy hasn't been, I felt like, the greatest, obviously, through the practices we got to see.
No, and I mean he's just learning how to kick a oblong ball. Right. It's different. I think it is going to be a process.
To see if they do, because obviously they don't have another international player that I know of that would take that practice squad spot. But that seems like tailor made for Smith.
Yeah, and we'll see how he goes. I mean, maybe he does develop over the course of training camp. You feel like, wow, that 60-yard potential is worth it. But right now, I'm more concerned with consistency. The things that we can talk about. So the new kickoff rule, right? There's going to be so many different ideas. I think there's going to be a lot of copycatting going on. Remember last year when the Patriots blocked a field goal and they had the guy kind of running and getting a head start, and then everyone tried I think the Saints did do that once. And everyone tried to copy it because it's just this new idea. That happens. And that's going to happen on a weekly basis with this new kickoff rule. Because everyone's going to be trying stuff, and it might work, it might not. Like Darren Rizzi said that they've been trying stuff that they've already been like, yeah, that's not, no, okay, cut it, exit out, do something new. But it comes down to a lot. It's okay, how do you line up in terms of, do you go with bigger players? Do you go with smaller players? What if they're going with bigger players? Do you match, or do you trust your speed, or vice versa, right? You're going to have personnel questions that you've never had before. The 20-yard line is now basically an out of bounds line. So we've heard some teams saying, hey, what if we put a safety back there and have the safety be the kicker? That way we have a guy who can actually go downfield and make a tackle. Well, yeah, okay, if that guy can kick well enough, sure, but there's a risk reward there of, well, if you kick it short of the 20, you're giving him the ball at the 40, right? If that guy shanks it, it goes out of bounds, you're giving him the ball at the 40. So you better have a lot of faith in that guy, or you're risking a situation where you're not making a tackle and they're still getting the ball in plus field position. So there's a question. Do you have the guys, when you're blocking, do they backpedal? Do they give ground, or do they attack immediately, right? There's no correct answer to any of this. It's all being done for the first time. The only frame of reference the coaches have is to watch XFL games. And the rules there aren't exactly the same. So there's different stuff. What happens at the end of a game? We've seen kicks at the end of games for years where it's there's 2 seconds left. Yeah, they're just going to dribble it on the ground. Someone's going to pick it up. They're going to get tackled. It's over. Can't do that anymore, because all that would mean is you're giving the other team the ball at the 40-yard line. So are you going to kick it out of the back of the end zone? Because then they get to play at the 30-yard. There's the ability to end a game without the other team getting a play is non-existent anymore. The only way that you could reliably end a game on a kickoff is by kicking it into that 20-yard receiving zone and allowing them to return it, and allowing that really, and you put, that's when you might see a star player back on returns, right? When might the Saints put Alvin Kamara back on return? Well,
great point there. Yeah, right.
What if there's 1 second left and the only option they have to make sure the game ends without an offensive play from the 30-yard line is to kick it to Alvin Kamara and see if he can do something crazy? maybe that's not a good example because the Saints have Rashid Shaheed and he's probably the better option. But you get the idea.
Both out there,
right? Or you put your starting linebackers out there in coverage, or that's when you might see stars out there. So there's so much to it that we're going to be learning about as we go. And you saw this. They were running trick plays on the return, like. The ball went to Taysom instead of Rashid, and so Taysom threw it back across the field to Rashid. He dropped it, which would be a nightmare scenario in a game. But that's the type of thing that we're seeing. Like you're going to see those combination returns. One we had, I think it was Jamal Williams kind of did a reverse handoff to Jermaine Jackson.
Yeah.
We're hearing Darren get really mad when the wrong person makes the call because someone has to decide. And with the Saints right now, their method is the guy on the right makes the call. It's kind of like in baseball, like the center fielder always, the guy coming in from the outfield gets to call him off. It's like, okay, if you're on the right, you make that call. If you're on the left and you make that call, Darren's going to curse you out. And we saw him do that to Jamal one time because the ball went to Jamal. And it was like, obviously he was the one who was supposed to get it, but that's still not the process that they've established. And there's so many of these weird little rules that everyone's kind of figuring out.
I saw him, like Jamal went to the sideline after that, and I almost felt like you could see him going, I don't know what I did wrong there.
Yeah. There's just so much. There's so much to it. Like what happens, so I think it was Randall Cobb. It was two Packers players. Randall Cobb and Ty Montgomery both did this. Ty Montgomery obviously played for the Saints. In the past, if a ball was kicked to the edge of the field and you have a foot out of bounds and you reach in and touch it, that's a kick out of bounds. Now, that would actually be the case if you were standing above the 20 and touched the ball. Then that would be a kickoff out of bounds, right? So if you do have a kicker who just shanks it and someone's able to go and make that play, then you get the ball to 40, right? I think there's the ability to if you're a good enough kicker and you can just kick like a worm burner, and make sure it gets into that 20-yard range, and then it just kind of kicks up. I think there's an opportunity for it. That's almost like an onside kick type opportunity that, if you're desperate to get the ball back, right? Not necessarily something you would do offhand, but if you're down a score and you need to get the ball back, who's to say that's not a type of kick that you could make? There's so much that we just don't know about that's going to be happening. And, that's why when we talk to Darren, he's excited. He seems like a guy who's like, yeah, let's do this. That's why he was in the, on the phone kind of hyping this thing up when it was happening. He's on the committee that suggested this. So
I think I've mentioned it before. Rizzy, for me, he has those head coach vibes to me.
Yeah, it's tough as a special teams guy. Joe Judge was a special teams coach. John Harbaugh a special teams coach?
Yeah, he started out there, right?
Yeah, so it has happened. It has worked. It's tough because you typically you'd want what makes it difficult is how the NFL coaching circle works. The coaching carousel works because you're constantly cannibalizing one of the coaches, right? If you're an offensive head coach, you're constantly seeing your defensive coordinator get cannibalized by other teams. But it's worse when you're a defensive head coach because what's going to happen next year, if the Saints have a really good offense, Clint Kubiak's going to be on the top of everyone's list to be their new head coach, right?
Right. Look what he did with Derek Carr.
Right. Well, look at Dave Canales.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah. And so a lot of times you only get 1 year of those guys. So at least if you are an offensive or a defensive head coach, you only have to worry about that on one side of the ball. If you're a special teams coach and your offense is great, your defense is great, you could lose both those coordinators one offseason.
Right.
And it's not going to be what prevents you from getting a head coaching job, but it is what makes it difficult to sustain success in that role.
Yeah, I just feel like Rizzy'd be one of those dudes, too, that could go into an interview and just blow people away.
I guess Dan Campbell is technically not anything. What would you call Dan Campbell? He's not an offensive coordinator. He's not a defensive coordinator. He's not a special teams coordinator.
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't know what you would really classify him as.
That's why he spends so much time thinking about decisions, because that's the only thing he's in control of. Yeah, we're going for it on fourth down. It's the only call I get to make.
Yeah, I'm looking now on the history of Dan Campbell just to see where obviously tight ends is mostly where he spent time doing things, and then was an assistant head coach for the Saints for a little bit, and then bam, head coaching gig.
Yeah. So anyway, that's where we are. I also think you're going to end up seeing a lot more kickoffs out of bounds in terms of on the sidelines. And the reason I say that, and this is the last thing I'm going to say, and I know people probably turn this off because why are we talking this much about special teams?
He's talking punter and special teams.
It's important. Everyone wants to complain about the punter, but they never want to talk about the punter. I think what you're going to end up seeing is because you're going to have two kick returners back, right? And so, for example, if you got Taysom Hill and Rashid Shaheed, who are you kicking the ball to?
Yeah.
You're not going to want to kick the ball to Rashid Shaheed. You're going to want to kick it to the other side. Well, how do you make sure that guy gets the ball? And it's like, okay, if you kick it too close to the middle, Rashid can just range over and get it. If you kick it to that guy, he can get the ball to Rashid and let him return it. The only real way that you can ensure that the guy you want fields the ball and runs it back is to kick it kind of to their outside shoulder.
Yeah.
And some kickers are going to be good at this. Some kickers aren't going to be as good at this in terms of directionally kicking the ball. It's not something that you have asked your kicker to do in years, which is make a free kick to a spot. So what's going to happen when people try to do that and miss? It's going to go out of bounds. And it's just going to be a scenario that it's like, well, why'd you kick it there? It was like, well, we were trying to get that guy the ball and I kicked it too far. So I just think you're going to end up seeing us particularly early on in this process, like in the beginning stages where teams are getting a little bit more creative and like haven't decided it's not worth it, that they're going to see more kickoffs out of bounds and more drives start at the 40. And that's the point, right? Like that's the idea. That's what the NFL wants. They want more points. They want more offense. They don't want every drive starting inside the 10.
Right.
This kickoff is designed to make the kickoff and the kick coverage the first play of the offense and the first play of the defense, right? Like they want it to be part of the game. So we'll see how it goes.
No, intrigued to see how it all, keeps shaking out. And that's another guy I'm thinking about now. I don't believe we talked to Groupie at all during the offseason workout so far, and just curious how he feels adapting to the new kickoff rules. I know he asked a lot of other players about that.
You keep saying that, but it's like they're there.
Right, exactly.
Like I think I talked to him for a couple minutes one day, and it's like,
okay.
He's interested. It's exciting for all these guys. There's also when Deuce talked about this, so we don't really need to talk about a ton of it. Like, how does it affect the roster? Like, do you keep an extra linebacker? Does that mean you keep one fewer position somewhere else? Right? Instead of 10 offensive linemen, do you keep a 9 and try to stash an extra defensive end so that you can run down the field and make a tackle? So all these questions that all these special teams coordinators and all these head coaches are trying to figure out in real time. And it's going to, like, when the first game that ends on one of these plays, it's going to be kind of wild. Or like a game that ends because that game-tying drive started at the 40-yard line instead of the 20,
One person who was not excited about, I won't say the kickoff rules, but all of a sudden being included in the kickoff return team, I felt like Alvin Kamara was like, yeah, I guess I'll do what they want me to do, but
he's not into it. He doesn't want to do it.
Totally didn't feel that at all.
I was expecting him to kind of toe the line and be like, oh, yeah. I'm excited. It's going to be fun. If they want me back there, I'll go back. He was like, nah. I think it's because like the one time I can remember him returning a kick, he got lit up. And it was like, I don't want to do that. Like, what's the upside for me?
Right. I'm trying to save my body here.
He has returned a kick for a touchdown in his career.
Yes, against Tampa. I remember that one vividly because it was one he bobbled, and then it was like, oh, no. And then he picked it up and ran. It was like, oh, yes.
Yeah, and no one got within like 5 yards of him. Like, he didn't break any tackles. It was just like, oh, yeah, he's good at that.
Right.
It's weird. It's like just something he's good at, right? Anyway. But all right, that's that episode. We're going to wrap it up here. Steve's going to go on vacation because he's that bitch.
I am. I need the beach.
So I'm going to be solo. Steve's going to go hang out with Sharks. I'm going to be solo. And so this next episode, I'm going to go through my updated roster projection. We'll get into it. We'll talk about it. I'm not going to be wearing red. I only have one red shirt, and we both decided to wear it today so I can match Steve. That's the truth.
Twinsies.
I just didn't want to wear green, so I wore red.
Oh man, you should be sporting you get the old St. Patrick's gear out and start wearing the beads from there. It all goes with the Celtics celebration.
Not doing it. It's It's like Olympics season now. Like I don't even know what season is it? Is it baseball? Do we accept baseball season down here? I don't feel like we do.
We're on Paul Skeen's watch every day now.
Yeah, it'll be something. It's the only thing on. Might as well watch it. Maybe watch some like Premier League soccer. I don't know. That's got.
Although I did have one of the Spanish broadcast guys from the Saints mention, he's like, "How come you guys aren't talking about Copa on Sports Talk?" I'm like,
I don't even know who plays in it.
I was like, yeah, because I know nothing about Copa.
I feel bad because it's like the biggest sport in the world, and I just like I know the rules,
right?
But I couldn't tell you like what the hell Copa is, or there's too many. Like there's like 17 different leagues. Like I don't know which is higher than the other. I do think relegation should exist for American sports. Like the worst team in the NBA should get demoted to the G League and replaced with the G League affiliate.
We also do have hockey, but that might be wrapping up this evening.
Hockey's. Oh, is that series still going on? I thought that it was over, and then I looked yesterday, and I guess Edmonton won. So.
Right, 3-1 Panthers. It's kind of like the Boston Mavs series. I feel like they let them get one, and now Panthers will close it out tonight.
Most likely, but all right, we've covered the gamut. We got it all. Steve's gonna punch a shark in the face, and I'm gonna hang out and host Sports Talk the rest of the week. Good stuff. Good stuff. I will have that roster projection to you. But that's it. That's the end of the podcast. Thanks everyone for listening, and thanks for subscribing. I know you all did.
Happy Who Dat weekend, everyone.
Who Dat? Peace.